So today we're so happy to be joined by Mr. Jim Rogers, the legendary investor. And for those of you who've been under a rock and who don't know who Jim Rogers is, he was born in Demopolis, Alabama, and he went very far in life. He got a bachelor's degree in history from Yale University and also a BA in philosophy, politics, and economics from England. And he began investing very early, and he did a stint in the U.S. military where I believe, Mr. Rogers, you'd said that you invested funds for your commander.
I did indeed. Yeah, I was nice to my commander.
That was a very great start. And now eventually you partnered with the great George Soros, the legendary George Soros, eventually to be known as the man who broke the Bank of England. You came together to found the Quantum Fund, which gained 4,200% returns between 1973 and 1980, which is crazy, sir. That is just crazy. And so his success enabled him to retire and travel around the entire world by car and motorcycle, starting at the age of 37. And of course, you founded in 1998, Mr. Rogers, the Rogers International Commodities Index. You've always been a bull in commodities. You're a prolific writer, having written investment classics such as A Bull in China, Hot Commodities, Investment Biker. And one of my personal favorites, Mr. Rogers, is Gift to My Children, which I've read many times, A Father's Lessons for Life and Investing. So how does an Alabama boy generate a 4,200% return, Mr. Rogers, in the market?
That's a good question. It's a good question. It's mainly because we were poor and scared, and we had to work hard, and we also loved it. We both loved what we were doing. George was a great trader and loved trading. I loved research. I didn't want to do anything else. So we both were loving what we were doing, and it was successful.
And it didn't feel like work to you, did it, Mr. Rogers?
I never thought I was working. I didn't think I had a job. It was it's a lot of fun. People used to say, you work awfully hard. I said, no, I don't. I'm having so much fun.
That's incredible and the way to be. And I just wanted to discuss you, first of all. And what I really want to do is try to deconstruct, Mr. Rogers, your investment philosophy and your investment strategy. Because I've read your books, I've seen many interviews, but I'm not sure if I've gotten to the actual basic principles of your investment strategy. So for the benefit of our subscribers and anyone who's watching this, what is your process of investing? Would you consider yourself a value investor? Or because in my investment strategy that I share with our subscribers, I have like my portfolio is divided into what I call my Warren Buffett portfolio, which is the safer value stocks. Then I have what I call my George Soros portfolio, which is sort of like the more wild bets. Where do you rate yourself in between those, and what are the basics of your investment strategy?
Well, if I have a strategy, I look back, and any success I've had is mainly finding things that were cheap, very cheap, and that usually mean they were ignored because they wouldn't have been cheap if they hadn't been ignored. So things that are ignored where there is positive change taking place, it's usually unrecognized change. If you can find things like that, chances are you'll have a great success. And the beauty of something like that is if the change is taking place, it's usually going to go on for a long time. And if you're lazy like me, you don't have to trade very much. You just buy these things and hold on to them for a long time as the change plays out and as the market recognizes the change.
So as I understand, and I could be wrong, George Soros enjoyed more the action of trading more, correct? Whereas you
Yes.
enjoy more sort of buying something at a very low price and then holding it, watching and waiting for when it goes higher.
In a synopsis, you did it right. That's exactly correct.
Yes, sir. And now in one of your books, I believe it was A Gift to My Children, you mentioned that you were speaking with another investor about Lockheed Martin. And the person said, why would you invest in a bankrupt company? But then, of course, it did go on to be very successful. How did you identify Lockheed Martin when others weren't able to see the potential that you were able to see?
Well, you may you probably don't remember, but there was a war, the Israelis and the Egyptians in the early 70s, and the Egyptians were suddenly shooting the Israelis out of the sky. Now, that had to mean something was wrong because the Israelis had the best air force in the world, and the Egyptians certainly didn't. So some research indicated to me it was because the Israelis, the Egyptians had electronic warfare, which was new, a new invention at the time. They'd gotten it from the Russians, and with electronic warfare, even the Egyptians could shoot the Israelis out of the sky. So I went down to Washington, and the Pentagon, some guys in the Pentagon confirmed, yes, this is exactly what's been happening. And so we're going to put a lot of money into electronic warfare. We have to catch up, and we have to beat the Russians. I've asked them who were good at electronic warfare, and there were 2 or 3 names they gave me. So I jumped on a plane, went out to Lockheed, was one of the names, and we bought a lot of Lockheed because they've said, yes, we are going to be the American experts in electronic warfare, and we're going to beat the Russians. And they did. They did. It took a while, but they did.
So you actually go and gather intelligence, basically, that others on Wall Street weren't willing to actually go out and do the groundwork or as much as you did?
Well, in a nutshell, yes. I mean, I don't want to be too boastful here, but not many other people even thought about that, as you pointed out. Lockheed was in bankruptcy. I brought it up with a group of investors once, and they sneered and snarled and said, who would invest in a stock like that? You know, that's absurd. Because Lockheed was in bankruptcy, which everybody knew. But it hurt my feelings, but we bought more because we knew what was happening.
And you said later you met that same gentleman, but you resisted the urge to tell him and brag about it.
I never brought it up to his face. No, I never did. I wish I had, but I never did.
You never did. So actually a few years ago, George Soros was asked about you while in China, and among the things they said, he said that you were one of the best securities analysts that he had known. So just for some of the subscribers to our channel who are starting out in investing, what are some of the principles that you use for analyzing securities besides gathering intelligence and doing the actual groundwork?
Well, you have to start with the numbers. I try to, whenever I teach people or talk to people, I try to explain to them, you have to start with the numbers. You have to understand the accounts of a company, the balance sheet especially the balance sheet and the income statement and the notes to the balance sheet. If you read the notes to the balance sheet, you've done more than most investors. If you read the annual report, you've done more than most investors. But then if you read the notes to the annual report, you do too. And you will learn all sorts of facts, some of them not too helpful, but some very meaningful. And it just takes, I mean, I hate to say it, it just takes, do your homework, do your research.
That's it. And are there any books you recommend to teach people how to actually do that? How to go into, and perhaps people that don't have an accounting background?
Well, I didn't have an accounting background. Accounting and bookkeeping is pretty simple to learn if you are diligent. It's mainly common sense if you just put your mind to it. You don't have to have a fancy degree from an Ivy League business school or something. You could just learn bookkeeping or accounting if you put your head to it. But if you understand the accounting and what's going on, you might have an advantage over other people. I mean, not everybody uses, I'm going to use the word honest accounting, legitimate accounting. Many people fudge the books. And if you are experienced, you can see who's fudging the books and who's not fudging the books. And that is very useful if you're analyzing a company.
Certainly, certainly. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Jason Apollo Voss. He wrote a book called The Intuitive Investor, and that his style sort of reminds me of yours, but perhaps you have not articulated it. But where he goes and he shows how to sort of get a feel for what they're doing with the numbers and so on and so forth. Is that just experience? Is that just years of putting in the work and doing that?
Well, it's a combination of everything. Yes, if you've read enough balance sheets, enough accounting statements, you figure things jump out at you pretty quickly after you've had a bit of experience. I didn't say it was easy. I didn't say there's an answer. I didn't say all you have to do is read chapter 3 and you get the answer. But experience will certainly help you a lot.
Certainly, sir, certainly. So just shifting gears here, I remember in 2010, I've been following your work for almost 20 years, probably since I was about 20 years old. And in 2010, you did receive the Schlarbaum Prize in Alabama from the Mises Institute. And you have spoken in passing about Austrian economics. And I was introduced to you actually by Tom Woods. I'm sure you know who that was or who that is. And how did you get introduced to Austrian economics? And what were the first works that you read in that school to sort of inform your knowledge of that?
Boy, that's a good question because it goes back decades. I guess just in my readings, in my wanderings, they made sense. The free market made sense, more sense to me than anything else. And I never said, oh, I'm an Austrian economist. I just realized that the way they thought and the way I thought coincided in many ways, because my experience in the world is that if you let people have their head, chances are you'll get better results than if you tell them what to do. I mean, you may know the difference between Russia and West Germany. But West Germany was a lot more successful than East Germany, a lot more successful
Certainly.
than Russia, because the West Germans just let people do it, and they made a lot of success.
Certainly. And so you studied philosophy as well. And Ayn Rand is always described in detail philosophy as eminently practical. How's your study of philosophy impacted your investment approach? Are there any principles that you've taken from philosophy to sort of give you an edge over other investors?
Well, when I was at school, I did study philosophy as part of my course. I wasn't very good at it at the time. I wondered if these guys were really serious, but later years, it all came together and I said, oh, now I know what they were talking about. Now I know what they were trying to say. And yes, I was extremely happy I took philosophy. It makes you learn how to think, and if you're going to be an investor, you have to learn to think around the corners, because whatever you see on the corner, that's not what's important. It's what's around the corner that's important. So philosophy helped me think more ways than I would have probably otherwise. Although, as I say, I certainly wasn't very good at it at the time.
Certainly, very. And just shifting gears, this is a topic which really resonates with me. That you're one of the first people. In fact, I see you as probably the grandfather, the godfather of the early retirement movement. I remember I read a quote from you that said something to the effect, I don't recall if this was an interview, but you said something to the effect, I'm making money not necessarily to be rich, but to buy my freedom. And you did end up retiring at the age of 37, which is a key element to our channel, where we're trying to help people retire earlier and get out of the grind. So how does one in this economy take steps to retire young, especially if they're just starting out? Like, what are some of the ingredients that you can recommend to normal people for actually retiring earlier than the rest, rather?
Well, I will repeat, I grew up in the backwoods of Alabama, and I'd never really seen much of the world. but I knew there was a big world out there, and I wanted to see the world. I wanted to know the world. So it was a long-term dream of mine, but to see the world and to do that, I couldn't certainly couldn't do it the way I was working, you know, full out all the time. So I wanted to save some money, save enough money so that I could see the world, could retire and see the world. And that's what I did. It's been my plan all my life, to the extent that I had a plan or knew that I had a plan. I wanted to see the world, so I did it. And I wanted to go around the world on a motorcycle. I had motorcycles. I knew they were exhilarating. I knew they were the best way to see the world, because you don't have much choice if you're on a motorcycle. So I did it. I retired when I was 37. The problem in those days was there was Red China, which was not too open to people riding in on a motorcycle. And there was the Soviet Union, which certainly wasn't interested in American capitalists driving around Soviet Union on a motorcycle. So it took me a long time to get permission. I kept knocking on the door and say, here I am. I want to drive around China. I want to drive across Soviet Union. Well, eventually, I kept trying, and eventually I got permission and did it.
Just through pure persistence. And incidentally, a thought that I had in my mind to question, did you happen to meet or even invest or do business with any of the Russian oligarchs like Berezovsky? Because I know there's the famous story of Berezovsky going to George Soros, but I'm assuming you were out of the partnership at that time.
If it's a famous story, I don't even know it. I was long gone.
I
don't even know the story. I was so long gone.
Long gone. Sure. So just shifting gears to China here, you've long been a bull on China and the East. So explain to our viewers, why did you move to Singapore and leave behind your beautiful house in New York?
Well, I came back from China in the 80s and said, China, China, China. And of course, everybody then said, you're crazy, Japan, Japan, Japan. Well, you know the rest of the story now, but I could see what was happening. And I would tell people, you must teach your children and grandchildren Chinese. Then I had one. Oh my gosh, what do I do now? We got a Chinese governess to come live with us and told her never to speak English. And it was working. I mean, my child spoke great Chinese, but she came home and many people, Chinese, Germans, and anybody, they would say, well, this is good, but by the time she's 9 years old, she's not going to do it anymore because it's not cool. And everybody else speaks English. She came home from the park in New York one day and said, she was crying. She said, everybody laughs at me because I speak Chinese and they all speak Spanish. I want to speak Spanish. So we realized that if we were serious, we we're going to have to move to a city where she had to speak Chinese. So that's why we moved to Singapore, so that our daughters would grow up knowing Asia, but really so they would speak Mandarin. And they both speak unbelievable Mandarin. Not because of me, I speak no Mandarin, but they speak perfect Mandarin, apparently.
Certainly. They're prize winning, correct? I believe one of your daughters is a recognized Mandarin.
Wow. Oh no, whenever there's a contest in Singapore, they win the contest for the best Chinese speakers. Blue-eyed girls are the best Chinese speakers in a Chinese country. The Chinese TVs had them on TV 3 times during Chinese New Year. And I said, why? And they said, we saw them on the internet and they speak better Mandarin than we do. So we wanted to show blue-eyed people can speak good Mandarin. It worked. In other words, that part has worked. It does not mean they will be successful or anything, but it does mean if they ever work in Chinese restaurants, at least they'll be the maitre d' and not going to be the dishwasher.
So your mission is accomplished in that respect. Now, are your daughters wanting to live in Singapore? Are they wanting to live in the United States for the future?
Well, if I were answering your question, I would say the United States, but my main answer is, who knows? You know, everything I thought when I was 19 was wrong about me, about the world, about life. Everything was wrong. So I don't pay too much attention to 20-year-olds telling me about their future. I certainly knew nothing at all at that age.
Sir, as all of us did not. But so there was a great business coach that said that the East is becoming the West and the South is becoming the North. That's an accurate statement in your eyes.
Well,
Meaning that
I mean,
many people are going to be migrating to the East for financial reasons, and also many people are going to be migrating to the global South as they form that alliance of the, or that more powerful alliance of the BRICS and so on.
well, look out the window. Yes, it's happening every day, everywhere you go. No question about that.
Now, parenthetically, I wanted to ask you, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Peter Zeihan. He's an analyst whose opinion is diametrically opposed to yours on China. And he's actually looking at the demographic picture of China, and it's sort of like Japan is now. He is saying that China is going to that. I just wanted to play this a few second long clip and then see your opinion on that. Here's this, and he's an analyst who works for big think tanks. And here's his opinion on China.
Today is Chinese demographics. We've gotten some new data out of the Chinese that has made its way to the UN, and so the updates have allowed us to update our assessment. And oh my God, it's bad. Okay, so let's start with this first graphic to show you where the official data had us as of a year and 2 years ago. This narrowing for the bottom 7 age blocks is the fastest aging workforce in the world, and arguably the fastest one in human history. This indicates that the number of new workers coming in is so small compared to the number that are retiring that you're having massive increase in labor costs. And from adjacent numbers that we do trust, I mean, Chinese data is always a little touch and go, but from the numbers that we do have that we do trust, which is labor costs, Chinese labor is increasing at the fastest pace of any country in any era at any time in history, including during the Black Death itself.
So he basically says that China's toast within 10 to 15 years because they're actually not reproducing enough, and their population is militarily they're going to decline, and economically they're going to decline. What say you, Mr. Rogers, to that?
Well, one of the first things I noticed was he says the Chinese numbers are suspect. Does he say Washington's numbers are not suspect? Do you believe anything that comes out of Washington, D.C.? I mean, my God, I've been listening to Washington for decades, and I'm always shocked at some of the things they say. Or Germany. Oh, my gosh. What governments do you trust? I have learned if you listen to governments for your investment advice, you're not going to get very successful. So, but to the other point, it seems to be happening. What I read the same thing he does. It seems that China is having a demographic problem. This has happened to many countries throughout history. 400 million Chinese. Let's say they have a decline in population. By the way, that's what they have been planning and trying to do for several years now. It may be successful. Does it mean the end of China? I don't know. We'll wait and see. In Japan, it is happening. Japanese population has been declining for 15 years now. So we will have an example, if nothing else, of how countries develop when this sort of thing happens. European countries have been declining, but they have a lot of immigration, illegal, but they still have immigration. We in the US have a demographic problem, but we have huge immigration to make up for it. China does not have a lot of immigration. Is it the end of China? I am dubious. China's been around 2,000 or 3,000 years with great periods of success and great periods of failure. I am skeptical that it's the end of China. But we'll find out. I mean, I don't know. I'm not riding around China seeing how many people are having babies.
Certainly. So cyclically, you still believe that we are shifting east as far as the economic center of gravity?
Well, I look out the window. I see where the money is. I look, if I look to the west, I see gigantic debts, huge debts. I mean, the United States is the biggest debtor nation in the history of the world, et cetera, et cetera. If you look to Asia, you don't see gigantic debtor nations. I mean, Japan is, but they've got a demographic problem. I see more serious problems in the West than I do in the East.
And certainly, and that's where we wanted to just come back closer to home. If you've seen the employment numbers that were just released over the last few weeks, they were pretty dismal. And of course, inflation, according to them, is going back up. I think they just released an article on Zero Hedge that says Goldman sees terminal rates at 3.5%, which of course we all know those aren't the true inflation numbers. What would you say, Mr. Rogers, the real inflation numbers are here in America?
But see, you have learned a very important lesson. Those numbers are not real numbers. You cannot trust the government. I can remember the numbers would come out and people would say to me, where do they shop? Where do they shop? I said, there's no inflation. Where do these guys buy their groceries? Where do they buy anything?
Send their butlers, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, how do they go to the movies? How do they go to the baseball game? What are they talking about? So back to the point from before, you can't trust the government. But there is inflation, and I suspect it's going to get worse. Many governments around the world have printed staggering amounts of money. I don't think the world has ever seen such money printing as we've seen in the last few, and not just the US. I mean, oh, Japan, my gosh, can't believe those guys. I mean, most people in the world are printing a lot of money, and maybe it's different this time, but that has always led to inflation. I would love for it to be finished now, but markets go like this. Markets go up, they correct, they go up, they correct, and it seems to me that's what's happening with inflation now. We're having a normal correction in an ongoing market.
Do you see hyperinflation happening, or even the loss of the dollar as the reserve currency of the world in the near future? Or is this something that, as many analysts say, could happen, but it's going to take a long time? It's going to take years.
Well, that big economic trends like that do take years. I don't see hyperinflation happening in the US anytime soon. It can happen. It has happened in many countries, including major countries. The loss of the dollar is a different. You know, Washington is doing its best to drive people away from the dollar. The US dollar is supposed to be the international currency, which is supposed to be neutral. Anybody can use it for anything. But now, if Washington doesn't like you, they cut you off, or they put sanctions on you. And many people in the world, including our friends, are saying, wait, that's not the way it's supposed to be. They could cut us off someday if they get angry at us. So many people are now looking for political reasons for a competitor to the dollar, certainly for economic reasons. We are the largest debtor nation in history of the world. So I can see Washington driving people away from the US dollar, not this month, don't worry, not this year, but their actions are driving people, friends and enemies, to look more and more for a competitor to the US dollar. And I mean, no currency stayed on top forever. 100 years is a long time. And so it's time-wise, maybe it's time to start thinking about the end of the US dollar historically. And Washington's actions are driving people away. Do I like that? No, of course not. But Washington bureaucrats are a different class of people.
Certainly, certainly. And you have said in many recent interviews that you're actually long the dollar right now. It's not a safe haven, but people see it as a safe haven. For average Americans who are not necessarily wealthy, how would you recommend that we position ourselves to actually benefit from what's coming up in the next few years? If not a loss of the dollar as the world reserve currency, then a decrease in confidence in the dollar. What advice would you give to people? How should we position ourselves?
Well, many investment advisors advise their clients always to diversify. I would urge them to diversify their country as well, the assets where their country is. Yes, you're Americans, you should have assets in the United States, but you probably know a lot about some other country because your great grandmother's from there, some reason. So find the country that you are interested in, that you like, and have some assets in that country or those countries, and start learning about investing or diversifying into other countries. It might turn out wonderful in the long run.
Certainly, certainly. Now, the election's coming up here in a few months here in the United States. What is your opinion about the outcome of that? Do you think Trump wins again, or do you think Biden can actually hold on to it? And how are you investing to sort of benefit or bet on what's going to happen in the election, if you're doing anything in that regard?
Well, I certainly hope we have the election. We always have. It would be a shock if we don't have the election. But history does show that normally whoever's in the lead at this stage rarely wins. Somebody else wins because things come up and change whatever happened. Remember Hillary Clinton was a lot. Could not lose, et cetera, et cetera. So if I were betting today, and I'm not for the reasons I just said.
Oh, certainly.
It certainly looks like Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump seems to be a lock.
But you think something could happen that snatches that victory away from him?
Of course, it often has. Something has happened. I mean, this is not predictions, but people die, go to jail, all kind of things happen. It's a long time until November. So I have no idea what's going to happen. I just know that historically, the leader at this point rarely wins.
Certainly. Now
we have two leaders at this point, Biden and Trump. Anyway, carry on.
But certainly there could be, do you think someone else could come in and take it from them? A third individual?
Well, I'm not suggesting, I would suggest that history shows that. Now, if one of them gets hit by a car or something, then something's got to change. And I don't know what, if anything, could change, but I do know that the world is constantly changing, especially in the United States.
Certainly.
And Hillary Clinton is not president.
Absolutely. We all thought she would be. But so
we knew she would be. We knew she would be.
That's right. Even the greatest statisticians knew she would be.
Yes.
Of course. So now, Gary Cardone recently said in an interview that looking at all of the charts now, whether it be in bonds, whether it be in commodities, they look like war charts. Now, with Russia and Ukraine, with what's going on in the Middle East, Mr. Rogers, are we going to war? Do you think we're on the precipice of a world war? Or do you think it's just going to carry on sort of like business as usual with skirmishes? Or do you think we're actually going to go all into war?
Well, I don't think we're going to erupt into a major war this year, but I see all of the worrying signs that happened before the First World War and before the Second World War. There are a lot of similarities, unfortunately, a lot of similarities. And the way these things work historically is it's a small thing happens over there, and then another small thing, a little bigger over there, and then another bigger thing happens here. And the next thing you know, people in a war, and they say, how did we get into this war? How do we get out of this war? And they cannot get out because it's too late. The war has gotten too big. And so that's the way it has worked historically. I see those kind of signs developing now. Not just, I don't see the end eruption now, but I certainly see the things that have happened before in history as wars have developed. And as I said, when the war is there, everybody says, how do we get out of this war? How did we get into this war? But by then it's too late. And nobody can figure out a way to get out.
Except by shooting, unfortunately. But do you see them
that ain't getting out? That's getting deeper.
getting deeper? Do you see America coming out ahead in this, or the whole global order changing and perhaps an acceleration toward the east if this war occurs? Do you think you see a global reset happening?
Well, every big war has led to a global reset. Most people didn't like it and weren't aware of it. But, you know, in the 1930s, Britain was the #1 country in the world. There was no #2. After the Second World War, Britain was essentially bankrupt. It lost its empire. It's lost everything. It lost its economic status. But even though it had won the First World War, it was the biggest nation, the most powerful nation in the world after the First World War.
Certainly.
I'm just reciting precedent that history leads to this. Wars do cause huge changes.
Of course, absolutely. I just wanted to, for the time we had left, I wanted to shift gears to AI and crypto, because these are very prominent issues and there are strong opinions on either side. We saw NVIDIA, which now seems, the bubble seems to have sort of popped there and it's going down again. But all the commercials everywhere I see, Mr. Rogers, are about AI. And it's my gut feeling that AI is sort of mostly hype. It's sort of like a meta program or meta programming, so to speak. But I don't think it's going to lead to the monumental changes in the nature of humanity that people are saying it is. But like you said, and I think it was an interview with Robert Kiyosaki, you said back in the .com bubble, you could open a laundry and call it computer laundry and they'd give you money. Well, now if you say AI, they give you money. Is AI hype? Or do you think that that's a bubble that's going to pop soon? Or do you think that that is the future?
Well, I am not technologically educated. I don't understand most technology, so I'm not the person to ask, but I have seen these kind of things in history. You know, the railroads came along and everybody was wildly excited. Electricity came along, radio came along, computers came along, internet came along. We've had these wildly exciting changes in the past that everybody got excited about, and the stocks went through the roof, and they usually didn't last. I mean, we still have television, we still have electricity, but the hype didn't last. The companies lasted. We still have Radio Corporation of America, extremely different company now. You couldn't even find it if you looked for it now. So these things have happened before. I am not technologically knowledgeable enough to comment too much. What I read, I do see that AI is going to change everything. It is changing everything. It's putting a lot of people out of business, but electricity put a lot of people out of business too. And we still have electricity. So,
and we survived.
Yes, we have survived. That's my point. It's what's going to happen. Certainly. Whatever AI is going to do, it's doing, and it's going to happen. But I'm sure that we're all going to survive. And I'm sure that whatever the hot AI stocks are in the next 3 or 4 years are not going to be the hot stocks 30 years from now.
Certainly. So it could be a bubble.
I
As
know
far as
it's
the
going to, I
current.
know it's going to be a bubble. It looks
No.
like the railroad bubble. It looks like, railroad, we still have railroads, but railroad stocks never made it back to the heights that they made it in the bubble. That's
Never.
true. Radio Corporation of America never sold again at the heights of the bubble. Nothing does. Bubbles are unbelievable.
Now, speaking of bubbles, this was the perfect segue. What is your approach to bubbles? Because Mr. Soros, your associate, he said famously, when I see a bubble, I buy. And he somehow knows when to sell them. How do you approach bubbles? Do you have any principles for knowing when to buy and knowing how and when to get out?
Well, again, I haven't seen Mr. Soros for decades, so but I do know that if you can play a bubble correctly, you're going to make a lot of money because unbelievable things happen. I tell you, Radio Corporation of America has never sold since at the prices it sold in the bubble. We still have radio, we have television, but the stock never sold that high again. So if you know what you're doing and can recognize a bubble and know the emotions that take place and what people do and how they act, sure, you can be very successful. But if you get it wrong, you're going to lose everything. Bubbles are really, really vicious on the upside and the downside.
Certainly. And crypto, Mr. Rogers, Bitcoin, is that a bubble? It seems like it's deflating again. It's gone from 75 now back to 62 Bitcoin. Has the bubble finally popped? Is it a bubble or is it different this time as far as Bitcoin?
If you ask if it's different this time, those are very dangerous words. It ain't
Exactly.
it's never different this time. I have never bought nor sold a crypto. I know people who've made a lot of money trading crypto. Seems to me that they are trading instruments, which is fine if that's what people want to do. But I don't see that we're ever going to use crypto as money. I don't see the U.S. government saying, "Oh, well, this is our money." All governments are working on computer money now, and all
Sure.
our money eventually is going to be on computer. But I don't see the U.S. government saying, "Okay, this is your money now, but if you want to use their money, you can use their money. It's fine. You can pay your taxes with their money." I don't see the IRS ever saying, "Oh, Jim, all right, you can pay your taxes with crypto if you want." That's not the way those guys work.
Well, did you hear the US government actually owns Bitcoin? It has
I'm sure
confiscated many of them from people who are supposedly using it in illegal activities, and they're holding it.
no, I'm sure they do. I mean, what else? They don't know what to do. You think the U.S. government knows how to invest? Oh, please. Oh my gosh, we wouldn't be the largest debtor nation in world history if they knew what they were doing.
Certainly. Now, Saifuddin Ammous, who's a Lebanese Austrian economist, wrote a book called The Bitcoin Standard. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that book, but his basic thesis is that Bitcoin will not be used as money for workaday transactions, but it will be used as sort of the way gold is used now to back currencies. Well, the dollar is not based in gold, but the Fed does own gold. They will hold Bitcoin as sort of a standard. And we're actually seeing this. I don't know if you heard a few weeks ago, they were discussing the fact that China and Russia are now thinking about starting a crypto-backed currency so they could sidestep the dollar. Do you see cryptos serving as sort of a standard, being that they're scarce, being that Bitcoin is scarce, at least theoretically, because they can only make 21 million of them?
Well, I know that the world, as I said before, is looking for something to compete with the US dollar. I can't say that it's going to be crypto for many reasons, but my problem is I don't know what else it can be. It cannot be the Chinese currency, which it should be, but the Chinese currency is not convertible. So you can't have an international currency that's not convertible. The world needs something I don't know what it's going to be. Maybe the world's going to try crypto for a while, but if it does, I don't. My view is it will not be successful in the end.
Certainly, certainly. So many leaders in South America are actually embracing the ideals of free market libertarianism. If you look at Javier Milei, who's the new president of Argentina, and also Bukele in El Salvador, and they have been implementing free market programs and programs to make the countries more secure. Should we move to Argentina?
Well, it's a fantastic country in many ways, natural sites, everything. It's just amazing, beautiful, gorgeous women. It's got many
been there?
assets. Oh yeah, a few times. I've driven through the whole country a couple of times. No, it's astonishing. And Argentina has had some amazing periods of success in its history. 100 odd years ago, if you were leaving Europe, most people had to decide, are we going to go to Argentina or the US? Many went to Argentina, many went to the US. You know who made the right decision, because Argentina's had many downs as well as ups in that period of time. On paper, it has everything a country needs, but it has never been able to put it together for an extended period of time. I hope he can do it. I read what he says. He says many things that are the right things. You know, many other previous Argentinian leaders have said the right things, and it's all fallen apart in the end. He's not the first. Let's hope he is the last.
Absolutely. And do you consider yourself a libertarian, Mr. Rogers?
Well, if I had to put a label on myself, I would certainly say that I have more in common with libertarian ideas than not.
Certainly. And of course, you remember Ron Paul. After Ron Paul, the libertarian movement in the United States sort of went down or plateaued. Do you see libertarians gaining steam again due to the economic crises that are happening? I mean, Trump has a lot of good views, it seems to me, but he also has a lot of bad views or negative views from the point of view of libertarianism. Do you see the chance of a libertarian ever becoming president of the United States?
Well, you just said that Mr. Trump becomes president. He's not a libertarian, so it would have to be somebody else further down the road. Who that could be, I don't know. For whatever reason, the Libertarian Party or the Libertarian philosophy has not been able to become accepted and popular in the US. Whether it's because people do not know about it or do not understand it, I don't know. But so far it has not clicked. And libertarianism in the US has been around 50 or 60 years. It's not, it started yesterday. And it still has not been able to grab hold. So I'm skeptical. I would like to see it catch hold. I would like to see lots of libertarian candidates, but so far it has not worked.
So far it has not. So one more question for you here. You studied in university, of course, and presumably your daughters are also studying in university. But given the state of colleges in the United States and all of the things about plagiarism that we're hearing, and also just simply the bad economics and the bad politics, do you recommend young people today that they go to university? Or do you think that now, due to technology, they could forego that and have the same amount of success?
Well, my older daughter is at university in the United States, and my second daughter is planning to go to university. So yes, but do you have to? No, of course not. The world's full of people, especially now, who did not attend university or attended and dropped out. No, 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 no. You can do it without university. In fact, you might be better off, because if you don't go to university, you have to really, really, really do it. But these days, if you're especially if you're good at technology, you might be better off not going to university. The university will get you your first job, but after that, it's up to you. Nobody cares if you went to
Precisely.
Princeton. Nobody cares if you went to Princeton. All they care about is, can you do it? You know, and if you can, forget the degree. Nobody will know or care. That's
Exactly.
not, certainly not conventional wisdom, and my daughters are going to university, but that will be so eventually that will be accepted by more people.
Certainly, Mr. Rogers. So it was great benefiting from your wisdom, and I loved the conversation. I thank you so much for being on, and hope we can talk to you again soon. Is there anything else that you wanted to, any final words you want to give to our viewers who are basically seeking ways to get off the prison grid, as we call it, to get away from slavery to a job and a boss?
The main thing that I tell people, young people especially, who ask me that is, if you figure out what you love and pursue it, you're probably going to be successful. Because those are the most successful, the people who are doing what they love. They never go to work. They wake up every day and start having fun. So if you can figure out what your own passion is, you'll probably be successful. And if you're not successful, you don't care. You're happy. You're happy, so you don't care if you're not successful by conventional standards. So figure out what you love. Many people never do. Many people are afraid to do what they really love, but it's extremely important to figure out what you love and pursue it.
Amazing words from the great legendary investor, Jim Rogers. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. I hope we can do it again sometime.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
We'll be
Thank
in
you,
touch. Have a
thank
great
you.
day.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.